Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. Tonight's story is about the architecture of a second chance. I'm going to tell you how I tried to demolish the man I was, a man built from greed and moral rot, and how I attempted to construct a good man in his place. The foundation of this new life was a charity, an act of atonement so profound I poured my entire fortune and my very soul into it. My wife, my beautiful, brilliant wife, was the master builder of this new life. She took the plans I had drawn and she built a cathedral of hope, a shining monument to our shared redemption. For 10 years, I lived inside that beautiful cathedral, believing I was finally safe, finally clean. I had no idea that the foundation was a lie, the sanctuary was a facade, and the beautiful stained glass windows were designed not to let the light in, but to hide the darkness that was festering within. I had no idea that my angel, my partner in salvation, was simply using the holy ground of my atonement to run a business that was more corrupt, more cynical, and more damned than anything I had ever conceived of in my first, wicked life. My former self was a creature of mythic ugliness, at least in the stories the financial press used to tell. I was a corporate necromancer. I didn't build things, I dismantled them. I would find strong, healthy companies, and through a series of brutal, surgical, and entirely legal maneuvers, I would bleed them dry, sell them for parts, and walk away with a fortune, leaving a graveyard of lost jobs and ruined lives in my wake. I was a predator, and the world was my hunting ground. My soul was a shriveled, blackened thing, but my life was a masterpiece of acquisitive art. She was with me through all of it. She was the perfect partner for a man like me. She was the grace that softened my brutal edges, the beautiful, smiling face that humanized my monstrous ambition. She was the one who could charm the board members, who could host the dinners, who could make the ugly business of destruction seem like just another form of sophisticated commerce. I thought she loved me in spite of the man I was. It never occurred to me that she loved me precisely because of him. The event that broke me was not a single, dramatic catastrophe. It was a quiet, insignificant moment. A Tuesday afternoon. I was in a coffee shop, and at the next table was a man I had destroyed a few months prior. He had run a small, family-owned manufacturing plant, a legacy of 3 generations. I had engineered a hostile takeover and sold the company's assets to an overseas competitor. I had made millions. He, I now saw, was filling out a job application for a position as a night shift manager at a big box store. He was gray, he was stooped, and the light had gone out of his eyes. He had been a creator, a builder, and I had turned him into a ghost. I went home to our penthouse, a palace of glass and steel overlooking the city I had conquered, and I was overcome by a wave of self-loathing so profound it was a physical sickness. The reflection in the window was not a king, it was a parasite. My atonement had to be as absolute as my sins had been. I didn't just retire. I performed a ritual of purification by fire. I liquidated everything. My partnership in the firm, my stocks, my bonds, the art, the cars, the penthouse itself. I converted a lifetime of predatory capitalism into a single, massive, liquid fortune, and I decided to build something instead of destroying it. Thus was born the foundation. We called it the Compassion Mandate. Its mission was a direct, karmic rebuttal of my former life. We would provide grants, legal aid, and mentorship to small businesses and families who were threatened by the very same predatory corporate tactics I had once perfected. I was going to use my money and my intimate knowledge of the enemy's playbook to fight for the little guy. I was going to become my own antidote. Her reaction was the final, beautiful confirmation that I was on the right path. She didn't mourn our life of obscene luxury. She celebrated my transformation. She held my face in her hands, her eyes filled with tears, and she told me that this was the man she had always known I could be. She threw herself into the project with a ferocity that matched my own. It was her idea that she should be the one to run the foundation. "You are the soul of this," she had said, her voice trembling with a passion I found intoxicating. "You are the moral vision, but you are a penitent, my love. You need to be protected from the dirt of the world you've just escaped." Let me be the one to handle the operations, the fundraising, the day-to-day battle. Let me be your shield so you can be our soul. It was a perfect argument, a perfect expression of her love and understanding. I agreed without a moment's hesitation. I became the reclusive founder, the quiet man behind the curtain. She became the foundation's public face, its heart, its brilliant, charismatic leader. And she was a miracle. The foundation flourished under her guidance. She was a genius at fundraising, a poet of philanthropy. Our reputation for integrity was flawless. We were a shining beacon of hope in a dark, cynical world. My life, for the first time, was quiet. It was meaningful. I had atoned. I was finally a good man. I had found my salvation in our shared work and in the beautiful, selfless woman who was my partner in this new, clean life. I had no idea that she was just a better, more patient, and more ruthless predator than I had ever been. For 10 years, my life was a quiet meditation on the nature of grace. I had a purpose that was clean and simple. I lived in a modest home, drove a sensible car, and the greatest luxury I allowed myself was the profound, soul-deep satisfaction of knowing I was doing good in the world. I watched her from the sidelines with a quiet, paternal pride. She was the star, the sun around which our new universe orbited. She was celebrated, she was adored, and I was the happiest I had ever been, content in her shadow, my own dark past a fading, distant memory. The first dissonant note in this perfect symphony was so quiet I almost missed it. It was a phone call, from a name I hadn't heard in a decade, a man who was a ghost from my old life. He had been my right hand, my most ruthless lieutenant in my corporate wars. He was a man who saw the world as I once had, as a game of predators and prey. We exchanged the awkward, stilted pleasantries of two men who no longer spoke the same language. And then, just before he hung up, he said something strange. "You know, for a saint," he said, his voice a low, cynical drawl, "your wife still has an impressive appetite for the company of sinners. You should see the guest list at her private donor dinners. It's like a reunion for our old hunting club." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound, and hung up. I dismissed it immediately. Of course she was courting our old world. It was a brilliant, poetic strategy. She was taking the tainted money of the predators and using it to heal the wounds of their prey. It was a form of financial jujitsu, a move so clever and so right that it could only have been her idea. I felt a surge of pride in her strategic mind and a wave of pity for my old colleague, a man still trapped in a world where he couldn't imagine an act of charity that wasn't also a secret angle. But the comment, as much as I tried to ignore it, had planted a splinter in my mind. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible irritant. I started to notice things I hadn't before. I noticed that the Foundation's biggest donors, the ones listed in our annual report, were often anonymous trusts or vaguely named corporate entities. I noticed that she had hired a whole suite of new consultants and vendors, firms I had never heard of, for services that seemed vague and esoteric. Strategic outreach, donor relations management, philanthropic logistics. When I asked her about it, my tone casual and curious, her answers were always perfect. They were the best in the business, she would say. Necessary experts to help us navigate the increasingly complex world of high-level philanthropy. It was about maximizing our impact, being more efficient with our resources. "The more professionally we run this," she had said, her hand on my arm, her eyes full of a sincere, passionate conviction, "the more people we can help. It's that simple." And I believed her. To doubt her would be to doubt the very foundation of our new life. But the shark I used to be was not entirely dead. He was just sleeping. And my old colleague's phone call had been the first drop of blood in the water. I began my own, secret and deeply shameful investigation. I felt like a heretic, a man questioning the high priestess of his own church. I started where I always used to start. I followed the money. I began with the anonymous trusts that were our biggest donors. I used my old, rusty skills, the ones I had once used to tear apart corporate veils, and I started digging. And I found that my old colleague was right. The money was not coming from enlightened philanthropists. It was coming from them. From the bottom feeders, the predators, the very same corporate raiders and asset strippers who were our sworn enemies. The list of ultimate beneficial owners was a who's who of my past sins. This was not poetic justice. This was a protection racket. They weren't donating to us out of the goodness of their hearts. They were paying for something. But what? My next step was to investigate the vendors, the mysterious consulting firms to whom we were paying millions of dollars every year. I hired a private investigator, a man from my old life who owed me a favor, a man who knew how to be discreet. The act of hiring him felt like a terrible, irreversible betrayal, but the splinter in my mind had become a throbbing, infected wound. I had to know the truth. He delivered his report a week later. It was a single, thin file folder. The consulting firms were all ghosts. They existed only on paper, registered to mailboxes in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. They had no offices, no employees. They were shell corporations, and they all had one thing in common. They had been set up through a series of legal firewalls by my wife. The money was flowing in from the predators, and it was flowing right back out into her secret private accounts. My foundation, my act of atonement, my beautiful cathedral of hope, was a laundromat. It was a high-end, brilliantly designed machine for washing dirty money. And the good deeds we did, the families we helped, that was just the soap. It was the cost of operation, the price of maintaining the pristine, charitable facade that made the whole filthy machine run. The world did not tilt. It inverted. I was standing on the ceiling of a life I thought I knew, and everything I had believed in for the past 10 years was revealed to be a lie. My redemption was not my own. It was a brand she had created, a valuable piece of intellectual property she had leveraged into a criminal empire. The woman I loved was not my partner in salvation. She was a predator who had looked at my broken soul and seen a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity. I sat with the private investigator's report in my hands, and I felt a strange, cold calm descend upon me. The grief and the rage were there, but they were buried deep beneath a layer of something else, something old and familiar. It was the detached, analytical clarity of the man I used to be. I was no longer a husband. I was a litigator, and I was looking at the evidence of the most profound and intimate fraud I had ever encountered. I knew that a simple, emotional confrontation would be a strategic error. She was a master of that game. She would deploy tears, indignation, righteous anger. She would twist my accusations into the paranoid delusions of a man still haunted by his past. I could not fight her with emotion. I had to fight her with facts. I had to build an airtight case, a fortress of irrefutable proof from which she could not escape. I spent the next week in a state of controlled, secret activity. I became a ghost in my own home, a spy in my own life. I used my old skills to follow the digital trails she had left. I gained access to her hidden cloud storage, her encrypted email accounts, and the full scope of her operation was revealed. It was a masterpiece of cynical genius. The money laundering was just the beginning. She had created a secret parallel business, using the foundation as her cover. She was selling a unique and valuable commodity, absolution. She would approach the predators from my old world, men and women terrified of their own dark reputations, and she would offer them a deal. For a substantial donation to the foundation, a donation that was largely tax-deductible, she would provide them with a full-service reputation laundering service. She would get them seats on museum boards. She would have fawning articles written about their newfound philanthropy. She would use the unimpeachable reputation of our foundation to scrub their dirty names clean. And the millions we were paying to her fake consulting firms, that was her fee. She was not just a money launderer. She was the high priestess of a new, corrupt church selling indulgences to the damned. And the most sickening part of it all was the language she used in her private correspondence with these people. She spoke of me. She called me her greatest asset. My story, my genuine, painful, and hard-won transformation from a sinner to a penitent, was her primary marketing tool. "My husband proves that anyone can be redeemed," she had written in one email to a particularly notorious corporate raider. His story gives our work an authenticity that is simply priceless. He is the moral foundation upon which we are building this enterprise. I was not her partner. I was her product. The confrontation was a quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly precise event. I chose the moment with care. It was the 10th anniversary of the founding of the foundation, a day she was planning to celebrate with a small, exclusive dinner for her biggest donors. I waited until she was getting ready, a vision in a beautiful gown, a perfect portrait of philanthropic grace. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked into our bedroom and laid a single, bound document on her dressing table. It was a copy of my case file. It contained everything: the financial flow charts, the printouts of her emails, the corporate records of her shell companies, and on the top, a printout of the email where she had called me her greatest asset. She looked down at the file. Her hands, which had been fastening a diamond earring, froze. The beautiful, serene smile on her face did not falter, but it changed. It became something else, something hard and brittle, like a mask of glass. She looked from the file to my face, and in her eyes I saw not a flicker of remorse or shame. I saw only the cold, sharp, and slightly admiring assessment of an opponent who has just made a brilliant, unexpected move. "Well," she said, her voice a low, cool melody, "the student has finally surpassed the master. I always wondered if he was still in there somewhere." It was not a confession. It was a compliment. It was an acknowledgement that the shark she had married, the predator she had admired, was not as dead as she had believed. "The foundation was a beautiful idea," I said, my voice as calm and as cold as hers. "But the business model was flawed. You seem to have made one critical miscalculation. You bet against my integrity. You assumed that my conscience was just another asset you could leverage." "It was," she said, turning back to the mirror, calmly fastening her other earring. "It was the most profitable asset we had. It generated millions in goodwill. Don't be so sanctimonious. The good we did was real. Does it really matter that we also did well for ourselves?" Her moral calculus was so warped, so perfectly, sociopathically self-serving that it was almost breathtaking. She had found a way to justify her greed as a form of enlightened self-interest. "It matters to me," I said, "and in about an hour it's going to matter to the United States Attorney's Office." I held up my phone. "I have a meeting. I just wanted to give you a professional courtesy, a heads up." It's something the old me would have done for a worthy adversary. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in her beautiful gown, in the beautiful life she had built on the ruins of my redemption. I had lost my second chance, my faith, and the last 10 years of my life. But as I walked out of that house, I felt a strange, clean, and terrible sense of peace. I had finally, truly, begun my atonement. The fallout was a quiet, controlled demolition of the life I had so carefully constructed. The choice to go to the authorities was the hardest and the simplest decision I had ever made. I had to destroy my own creation to save my own soul. I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office the next morning, and I laid my entire world on the table. I presented my case not as a victim, but as an accomplice, a man whose negligence and willful blindness had allowed a massive criminal enterprise to flourish under his own name. I offered them everything: my testimony, my evidence, and my own culpability. The scandal, when it broke, was a quiet one, handled with the discreet efficiency reserved for the wealthy and the powerful. There were no splashy headlines, no televised arrests, but the consequences were absolute. The compassion mandate was dismantled, its assets seized, its reputation erased. The good work it had done was a permanent casualty of the war. She and several of her donors were quietly indicted. She, true to form, fought with the cold, strategic brilliance of a cornered animal. Her defense was that I was the mastermind, the unrepentant shark who had used her as a pawn in a sophisticated scheme to get revenge on his old enemies. But the evidence was too meticulous, too complete. She took a plea deal, a quiet arrangement that involved a few years in a minimum security prison and the forfeiture of the vast majority of her stolen fortune. She vanished from my life, a ghost in a prison jumpsuit, her name a footnote in the story of my second and most spectacular failure. I was left in the ruins. I had lost my fortune for a second time. I had lost my reputation. I had lost the beautiful lie of the life I had been living. I was a man with no past I could be proud of and no future I could see. I was adrift, a man who had tried to buy redemption and had discovered it was the one thing that was not for sale. But this time, hitting the bottom felt different. The first time it had been the crushing weight of my own sins. This time it was a clean, if painful, severance. I had done the right thing at an almost unimaginable cost, and in that cost I found a strange, quiet freedom. My new life, my third life, began not with a grand gesture but with a small, simple act. I took what little money I had left and I opened a small, free legal aid clinic in the poorest part of the city. I didn't name it after myself. It had no name at all. It was just a room with a desk and a sign in the window that said legal help. My clients were not the victims of corporate titans. They were just people. People facing eviction, people being crushed by medical debt, people who had been chewed up and spat out by the very system I had once been a master of. The work was grinding, frustrating, and often heartbreaking. There were no big victories, no seven-figure settlements. A victory was getting a single mother a stay of eviction for another month. A victory was negotiating a small reduction in a hospital bill. But every small, hard-won victory was real. It was clean. It was mine. I will never be a good man in the way the world defines it. I will never have a shining reputation or a monument to my own charity. The stains on my soul are too deep, the past too dark, but I have found something more valuable than redemption. I have found purpose. I have learned that atonement is not a destination. It's not a foundation you can build to impress the world. It's a quiet, daily, and often thankless job. It's the work of showing up, of fighting the small battles, of trying to leave the world a fraction of an inch better than you found it. It's a life's work. And for the first time in my life, I am finally, truly at peace with the man I am. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.